Welcome back. Now, the Labour MP Diane Abbott will tomorrow address what she calls a crisis of masculinity sweeping across Britain in the face of unemployment and recession. In a speech to the think tank Demos, she'll warn of a generation of disaffected young men being driven to homophobia, machismo and misogyny as they lose the traditional role as breadwinner. Katie Razzle has been out to a boxing gym under the Arches in South London to see what people there make of it all.
You don't get much more old-school male than a boxing gym. You can smell the testosterone. But here in South London, they're clear what makes a man.
I think competitiveness is definitely masculine, strength, being strong. I also feel respect in people.
The youngsters who train here learn to channel their aggression in the ring. The men in charge do worry masculinity has taken a knock.
I think there's a problem in that young people want to be able to demonstrate their masculinity. They want to be able to show that they're men and that they're tough, but they don't have much of an arena to do that in. The crisis is that lots of fathers aren't interested, and we see that the kids that we work with, the ones whose dads bring them down to the gym, instantly you see they've got more self-esteem, more self-confidence, but it's the ones where you never see the family, and they're sometimes the ones who are struggling and have the real low self-esteem and self-confidence.
Here they insist on respect for women, but in the outside world, a heady concoction, including what Diane Abbott calls the pornification of British culture, has thrown up some shocking changes in attitudes.
With a lot of the lads that we're working with now, the younger ones, they're coming up and it's acceptable, it's the norm to beat up a woman. If a girl's rude to you, then you give her a slap or you give her a punch, and that's seen as an acceptable thing to do, and that's the most concerning thing for me.
I was brought up the old way, open the door for a lady, try and treat a lady like a lady, so they have to treat them like a lady.
And at this gym, they're trying to teach youngsters the old way, to use male aggression positively, to find role models they can respect, and to take responsibility for their actions. Perhaps that can provide some answers to the struggles over what makes a modern man.
Katie Razzle reporting. Well, now, earlier I spoke to Diane Abbott, who will be making her case to Demos tomorrow, as well as the broadcaster and journalist Sam Delaney. We were also joined from Sheffield by the youth worker Beth Stout, who set up the charity Gold Digger Trust, which works to boost young people's self-esteem. I asked Diane Abbott to set out her case.
You've had male abuse of women for centuries. I'm looking at a much broader phenomenon. I think we need a debate about what constitutes masculine identity. When I was a child, my father brought home his wage packet every Friday and gave my mother her housekeeping and gave us our pocket money and a bar of chocolate. And if you'd asked my father to define himself as a man, that is how he would have defined himself, by getting and providing. But with a kind of deindustrialisation and the collapse of blue-collar employment, it's far harder for some men to define themselves in modern society.
Well, Sam, you've written a book on fatherhood. I mean, are those fathers still around that bring the wage packet back on a Friday?
Well, they do exist alongside numerous other types of man and numerous other types of fathers, which I think is only a good thing. I think that's right, Dan. I think, you know, my grandfather's generation saw themselves, the stereotype was a hard-working breadwinner who was probably quite good with his hands, handy at bicycle maintenance and bleeding the radiators and whatnot.
Beth Stout, in Sheffield, you were worried about how boys were behaving towards girls in the city overall, and I'm wondering, that was some 8 years ago when you set up your project. Are you still worried?
Yeah, in fact, just over a year ago, we started a boys project specifically to work with lads around how they view women, how they view relationships, how their self-esteem is rooted as well. What do they think defines a man? Because I think we struggle for good role models for girls and for lads, but particularly it seems to be really apparent that boys are lacking a good role model. And actually a lot of the young boys that we work with, the teenage guys who are struggling to figure out what does it mean to be a bloke and how does that mean they treat women, actually they're struggling to find someone who really respects women, who cherishes them, who honours them, and who is kind of really positively supporting them rather than abusing them, as we see in our sexual exploitation work.
I think she's exactly right. That's what I see in the communities around me. And what some men are retreating into and some boys are retreating to is a kind of hyper-masculinity. And, you know, the pornified culture we live in affects boys as much as girls. But there is a failure from politicians because we need to start putting full employment back at the centre of the political agenda, because it's the collapse of employment for blue-collar men which has caused some of these problems.
I get the sense, Sam, you don't chime with this. You think basically men are pretty clear about what masculinity involves and they're pretty okay about themselves.
Well, what I think is that there is no kind of stereotype or model that men have to conform to anymore with regards to masculinity, which is a very positive thing. I think that during the industrialised era to which you refer, I think men's roles were very narrow. This idea of having a kind of a role where you went out and you earned the money and you came back and there was this kind of emotionally remote but quite kind of masculine figure sitting grumpily in the corner, the classic, you know, portrayal of a man. If anything was depressing and miserable for men, it was feeling like they needed to fit into that. Now, men have more choices than ever. And also, it's far more acceptable for men in this day and age to be domesticated, i.e. to play the role of the person changing the nappy or cooking the meal and staying at home, which an increasing number of men do,
Diane,
especially during this recession. And they have respect for that. And before, you were considered slightly a failure to be doing that. Now men are more domesticated and it makes them and their families happier.
Do you accept what Diane says, which is that at the heart of it all is employment, that if in fact there aren't rewarding and decent jobs, you will begin to get people who lose their own sense of identity?
I think it's probably a little simplistic to blame it on one thing, and I don't think that's what Diane's doing either, but I think the young people who we have now, that generation, aren't like the generations that came before, aren't even like my generation just before them, because they've got all sorts of things that are pressuring them, whether that is growing up with a lack of aspiration with jobs, or whether that's actually the influence of pornography and access and social media. There's all sorts of things that are going on, and I think that affects girls as well. One of the things that we see when we ask young girls, what do you think people want out of a relationship? They automatically say, girls want love and boys want sex. I don't think that's true. I don't think that's a good representation of boys, but I think there's this image almost of what lads are meant to be, and I think combating that and giving them the space to really think about what masculinity really means is really key.
If we cut back to what happened yesterday, the conviction of these guys for running a grooming gang and setting very young girls to prostitution, and then attracting men from all over the country to use them for sexual purposes. And they're not alone. There were a lot of other gangs that have done this. Isn't that a sign that there's been some kind of a failure of masculinity?
I don't think...
Who needs to do that sort of thing?
I think it's a sign that society has some terrible and perverted and corrupt people in it. Just as Diane said at the beginning, there has always been the case. There has always, unfortunately, been cases of men who will exploit women in terrible ways. This is not a crisis of masculinity. If we talk about attitudes towards sex, again, I would say that we're probably in a better place now as regards young men than ever before, because whilst you don't endorse a lot of the kind of extreme pornography that is available online, the fact that there are less taboos and more information that young people can be exposed to from an early age means there is less repression, less confusion, you know, and young people tend to be more relaxed. Now, whilst there may be people who go off the rails...
Diane is disagreeing with you here.
Do you know that the age when a young boy can see hardcore pornography online has dropped down to 11? Do you know there are girls in schools who think the way to become, you know, part of the in crowd is to text pictures of their naked bare breasts to boys, not understanding once you put those things out there online and on the internet, they never go. I don't think we're in a better place at all. I think a lot of young people feel very worried, and if they could just express it, don't know how to navigate this world of pornography on every laptop.
Beth, presumably you would advocate a project like yours in every city.
I would. That's why we train people all over the country to do what we do, and we'd love to see that happening in every place. Exploitation, sadly, is happening in every city, in every town.
Beth Stout, Diane Abbott, Sam Delaney, thank you both, all three, very much indeed.